Alright, so this last unit was on ionic compounds, and now we're going to get into covalent compounds. So covalent compounds are between two nonmetals, so it's a nonmetal plus a nonmetal. And remember, your nonmetals are the elements that are to the right of the staircase. And also another thing with covalent compounds is that no charges are involved. And so because no charges are involved, there's going to be no crisscrossing. Alright, so we need to figure out how to name covalent compounds and also how to write their formulas. So the first thing we're going to do is naming. Your rule is that you need to name the first element and then name the second element, just like ionic. Just like the ionic compounds, the second element always has an "ide" ending. The only thing that's different now with covalent is that we're going to use a prefix to tell how many of each element there are. So I'm going to write out the prefixes that we're going to use. So prefixes will go 1 through 10. Mono stands for 1. Di is 2. Tri is 3. Tetra is 4. Penta is 5. Hex is 6. Hept is 7. Oct is 8. Non is 9. And dec is 10. Okay, so those prefixes are going to be used to tell you how many of each element there are. There's one little exception, and that is that mono is only ever used on the second element. So I want you to write that. So the prefix mono is only ever used on the second element. Alright, so I'm going to go to the next page to do some examples. If you had PCl4, the name of that, you name your first element, which is phosphorus. Your second element is chlorine, and the second element you change it to an "ide" ending, so it's phosphorus, and it's going to be chloride, but we have 4 of those, and so we need to use the prefix for 4, which is tetra. So it's going to be called tetrachloride. So the name of PCl4 would be phosphorus tetrachloride. If you had just S and O, it's sulfur and oxygen. And remember, the second element is oxygen. We have to change it to an "ide" ending, so sulfur and oxide. So we name sulfur. And we would never say monosulfur because mono is only ever used for your second element. So sulfur and then 1 oxygen, so you have to use the mono prefix, and it would be monoxide. So the things that you're putting together are the prefix and the "ide" ending while naming your first element and your second element. Another example, if we had P2Br3. So your elements here are phosphorus and bromine. Bromine is the second element, so it needs to turn into bromide. And you need to use your prefixes. So for your phosphorus, you have 2, so it would be diphosphorus. And your second element, bromine, which turns into bromide, and you have 3 of them, so diphosphorus tribromide. Another example, if you have IO9, let's see, or I4O9. Alright, so your first element is iodine, second element is oxygen, which would turn into oxide. You need to use your prefixes, so 4 iodine would be tetraiodine. And then 9 oxygen, so the prefix for 9 is non, and oxygen would be oxide, so non-oxide would be the name for I4O9. One more example, CS2. So carbon and sulfur, you only have 1 carbon, and remember you don't use mono for the first element, so it's just carbon. And your second element is sulfur, which would turn into sulfide. You have 2 of them. Prefix is di, so it would be carbon disulfide. Okay, so that is if you have a formula and you need to name it. Now we are going to go into writing the formula if you have the name, and this should be very simple. So writing formula. To write the formula, you just use the prefix to decide how many of each element should be in the formula. And I'm going to remind you again that when we're doing covalent compounds, you do not crisscross. So, for example, if you had dichlorine tetraoxide, so that's your name. You need to figure out the formula. You look at your prefixes. So dichlorine tells you that there's 2 Cl's. So you'd write that Cl2. And then tetraoxide would be 4 oxygens. So Cl2O4. Another example, if we had dihydrogen monoxide, right, so you look at your prefixes. Di means 2, so 2 hydrogen, H2. Monoxide, so mono is your prefix for 1 oxygen, H2O. So the actual name for water, or H2O, is dihydrogen monoxide. I'll do one more, nitrogen tribromide. So first element doesn't have a prefix, so that means there's just one of them, so you know it's just N. Second one, tri, meaning 3. Bromide is bromine, so NBr3. So that is all there is for covalent naming and writing formulas. Biggest thing to remember is that you do not have to crisscross anything, and you're not using charges at all.